This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 30 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Engaging Experts. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today's guest is Mike Evans, founder of Vega Compliance Consulting, a risk management firm specializing in the financial services sector. Additionally, he has extensive experience in capital investments, hedge funds, and more. He's a sought-after expert witness. Mr. Evans holds an MBA from Stern. Mr. Evans, thank you so much for joining me here today on Engaging Experts.
Thanks, Noah. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's jump into it. You've had a decades-long career in financial services, but how did you first become involved in expert witnessing?
I kind of fell into expert witnessing through an old colleague at Lehman Brothers. This was long after Lehman Brothers went defunct. I had met up with somebody who was doing some expert work on Wall Street topics, not compliance and risk management in particular like I am, but he thought with the decades of experience with all my previous time at Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers, and then at BNP afterwards, that people could really utilize my knowledge and experience.
Were you familiar with expert work at the time at all?
Not really. No, I had helped with some fact witnesses, and I had helped prep people in my role as chief compliance officer and compliance subject matter expert in certain trading areas. So I'd helped people prepare for trial, but I'd never done any expert witness myself. And litigation was, kind of two steps away from my general practice.
The individual that helped you get started, did they show you the ropes at all, tell you what to expect? Or did you kind of just hit the ground running, get a call from a potential engagement and just have to answer a bunch of questions?
A little bit of each. I had a couple of books to read to kind of freshen up on it, and he pointed me to a few websites. So I did my own research on that and tried to work at learning the industry from that angle. The subject matter came easy to me, but the process and the networking of litigators versus classic compliance advisors was a little bit different.
How long ago would you say that was when you very first got started in expert witnessing?
Just 2 years ago, not too long ago. Between my career in big shops at Wall Street and between that time and the time that I started expert witnessing, I caught the entrepreneurial bug and started my own hedge fund. So that gives me another kind of an interesting angle. It never really took off. There was this thing called COVID, and then there was an invasion in the Ukraine, and there were a couple of things that made it a little difficult to generate alpha in the hedge fund space.
Sure.
So I did it for a couple of years. I managed a few $1 million from friends and family, but I was not able to get to the assets under management to really make it a kind of $1 billion venture that, of course, every hedge fund manager wants to be. So after 2 years, I went back to my knitting as a compliance expert, but I held on to the entrepreneurial bug and did some advisory and consulting work, starting Vega, and then the expert was kind of the next logical step, the expert witness work.
How do you manage your schedule with so many different things going on, spinning lots of plates? If you get a potential engagement, everything seems fine. How do you ensure that you have enough time to give it your all?
Well, I try and be honest with everybody as much as possible. Sometimes you just don't know, and you do get jammed, and you have a couple late nights, and entrepreneurs are used to working late and on weekends and, juggling or spinning plates, as you say. It's just part of being an entrepreneur. So I try and manage it as best I can. I always try and leave a little bit of time for, family and friends and relaxation. But if that doesn't happen for a month or two, because you're back to back, so be it.
Naturally. Let's talk a little bit about those phone calls. So what are the sorts of questions that you're asked, and what are the sorts of questions that you like to ask to kind of ensure that it's going to be a good engagement that makes sense for both parties?
Well, I like to make sure that I am the right expert in these things. It's pretty particular. I'm not a CPA or that, and I don't even have my JD. So I've got a master's in business, and that's really my focal point is, it was the business, in this case, banks, hedge funds, broker-dealers, people who are getting sued or potentially, suing their counterparties? Are they in need of someone who understands from the inside how does governance procedures work? How do controls get implemented? A lot of what I see from the attorney side is, I know the regulations. I know how the short sale rule works. I know how people are supposed to do due diligence on their clients and stuff. And I respect that from a regulatory standpoint. I agree. The lawyers have training and knowledge, and they can read the law themselves. The compliance angle, which is a little bit more interesting and I think is valuable to them, is how do these things get implemented? Generally, a lawyer will have a case where, the policy says that you have to do X, Y, and Z within the organization. And they're saying, well, that couldn't have been done or else my client would not have been harmed. So I can step in and say, yeah, those policies and procedures were market standard. That's true, but they weren't implemented properly, right? The wrong person was doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, or this committee didn't meet and actually discuss what they should have done. And so from a compliance standpoint, it's important to get those things right. And if they're not right, you can compare the policies and procedures, which generally are received as part of discovery, versus, the email trail that says, oh yeah, this person just skipped those 2 steps and moved on. And then you find out, that's a problem. So there's the, the helpfulness for somebody who's been in compliance, is, grown up in that space for 25 years, 30 years almost. And, have all the licenses, et cetera, but really the experience working your way up into the point of being the chief compliance officer and having these teams, to manage and do all of that. I think it makes me a valuable resource.
Absolutely. Have you ever been brought in as a consultant and had that job kind of shift towards an expert witness or towards a potential expert witness? Got brought in for some information to kind of educate the attorney a little bit, but have them say, this might actually go to court. Can I also put you on the stand? You ever had one of those?
So I'm actually in the middle of that right now. Again, it's only been 2 years, but I have to say, one of my first cases that's been kind of dragging on. There's been a motion to dismiss, and it's been quiet for a little while. I was simply brought on as a consultant, and my engagement letter said, we just need you as a consultant. No notion yet of a testifying expert or writing a expert report at this point. But it's certainly, I kind of did my due diligence on all of the items that were part of their discovery and et cetera. Now there's a point where they're saying, well, would you be willing to say that on the stand? And of course, everything I've told them is honest and forthright. And if I didn't believe it 100%, I wouldn't be telling my client that in the first place. So of course I can tell a jury and a judge the same thing.
Does that complicate your engagement letter at all? Do you ever have to have like certain breakouts, like these are my rates, this is my retainer, but on the other hand, if it goes to trial, we have to do these other things. Do you have to renegotiate, or is everything kind of encapsulated in your initial agreement?
It's not necessarily encapsulated, but it's more of an add-on than a full renegotiation. My rates are pretty standard. So whether I'm just, doing the research, reading the material, doing my own independent gathering of citations and things, or testifying, in a case, I charge the same rate anyway. So people aren't going to be surprised with what happens. As long as we have an overall budget. That's one of the things I think that could go wrong. And I would advise other people who are just stepping into it. Well, some of my first experience was we didn't have a full budget. At least I didn't understand what it was. The agent who had presented me to the client, to the law firms, didn't have that open channel of communication, I don't think. And once my third or fourth bill went through and, there was a little bit in arrears and they kind of had a little sticker shock after a while, they said, okay, now let's tell you that the budget was really X, not Y, and we need to scale things back. And that was a little bit of an eye opener for me. So I'm going to try and not let that happen and find out early on when when we engage, is this a $50,000 budget or a $500,000 budget? Like where are we here? So
So you think as an expert witness, you should probably have a proactive approach in terms of making sure that there's a meeting of the minds vis-a-vis the engagement letter before you begin work.
Sure. And I try and, I adopt different aspects of the engagement letter, every engagement, because I'll learn something, the lawyer will come back and say, do you really need this? And I would say, no, so let's change it to this. And if that's more palatable to lawyers in general, I'll make that part of my draft for the next time. So it's definitely a living document, but it's important to have that document, I think.
Right.
I know some people just do it, maybe they've been doing it so long, they already have a good relationship with their attorneys, and that's great. But I like things, maybe because I'm the compliance guy, I like things in black and white. It's got to be in writing or it doesn't exist as far as the regulator is concerned. So that's been my mantra as well.
Any other red flags for those initial phone calls or even down the road?
Not too many. I mean, I've been pleasantly surprised. Everybody I've spoken with are professional and above board. Again, if you're not the expert, you can help find one for people. And sometimes you can monetize that, but oftentimes it's just goodwill. And I think building that goodwill, people pay it forward, and that's a positive for your karma and for your career. So I'm happy to do that as well.
So you've been doing this for a couple of years. Have you found yourself on the stand yet?
So I have been in front of a FINRA arbitration panel, and that was kind of interesting. People were saying, you better watch out for the deposition. You better watch out for the cross-examination. I really kind of felt invigorated to be there. I like the intellectual tete-a-tete. I think, when you can spar through ideas, I think they recognize I was the expert in this space, but that, the opposing lawyer is going to challenge you on certain things. And, you can set the record yourself. Like it's certainly not for the timid or faint of heart. But I do enjoy it. Like that was the best part. All the analysis that went into it, obviously, is helpful and it pays off. But I'm not the ivory tower type of guy who just wants to, work on paper. I enjoy both the camaraderie, but also the engagement of a dialogue that gets through to the Socratic method and everything else that you do to try and find the truth in between the facts. So I have been, and I'm looking forward to the next one as well already.
Do you have any pre-trial ritual or routine that gets you ready, gets you in the right headspace to go in there? I have people who drink a ton of coffee, or they fast, or they do yoga, or whatever it is. Do you have any kind of a routine that gets you ready to go?
Yeah, I definitely have 2 cups of coffee, but not 3. So, because you don't want to break up the momentum once you're out there and need a break, a nature break. But
excellent.
I do like my caffeine, so I need a little bit of that. My other tips for people just starting out is just make sure you have a decent suit. I always wear a white shirt because I never want to throw things off, and just look plain, simple, and professional. That's important.
Speaking of looking plain, simple, and professional, tell me about demeanor a little bit. How do you use not only your expertise, but your body language, the manner in which you speak? How do you use these sorts of intangibles to better connect with whoever the fact finder is in the case?
Yeah. I think what helps, at least helps me, is having teenage kids. So I've got 3 well, now they're beyond teenage kids, but one is still a teenager, and having to teach them how to communicate clearly and effectively, and then practice what you preach, is the same thing that you have to do when you're speaking professionally. When you're in the chair and everybody's focused on you, you want to enunciate. You want to speak slowly. You would know because you're a podcast, radio host type of guy. So it's the same thing. You can't slur your words. You can't use too many, anachronisms and colloquial language. You should just, again, speak professionally, speak clearly. The same thing that you would tell your kids to do. Make eye contact. And you're making eye contact with the finders of fact. You don't necessarily want to face the attorneys because the attorneys aren't who you're trying to help here. You're trying to help the finders of fact understand. And that eye contact is important. in addition to speaking slowly, clearly, take a breath, make sure they understand what you've just said. And if they don't, rephrase it.
A couple of things. So, when you talk about making eye contact, have you done any telepresence sorts of depositions or actions of any kind where, where is eye contact? Do I look at the camera? Do I look at the window? What am I doing? So, how does technology kind of change things?
Yeah, the most telepresence or Zoom/Teams/Google Meets, whatever your modus is,
Right.
in my experience, it has been the speaking with the attorneys who are engaging with you. So in the process of soliciting, new clients is probably more. I do the other stuff face to face as much as possible. So on the technology side, always make sure that you got a good bandwidth connection. Always test your connections before, 10 or 15 minutes before you go live. I often now tell I don't want to say her name, smart speaker, that, set an alarm 15 minutes early, 20 minutes early, so that you can go in and test those things and make sure you don't have problems going, during the important times to speak. Because there's always a glitch here or there, and then have a backup plan, right? So everybody's got their laptop, but you've also got your phone. As long as you got a good signal on both, you'll have a backup plan. Because I've had to resort to the backup plan a number of times.
So we were talking about an arbitration that you're in the process of doing, and
that one's closed. Yeah, one was closed, and a couple are live coming up.
So how is an arbitration or any alternative dispute resolution type different for an expert witness compared to a formal trial? Are these types of arbitrations kind of quasi-judicial, the sort of more formal arbitrations, or is this a more casual sort of an arbitration? Because I know that there's some that operate almost exactly like trials. There might be depositions, there might be reports, there might be discovery, and then sometimes it's just a person that a couple people talk to, and he's like, "Nah, you're right, the other one's wrong."
I would say it's somewhere in between. It certainly wasn't a mediation or that casual last, one person. These were three people. In FINRA, you always have a majority, so at least two non-industry arbitrators. This case, there were three independent arbitrators. So although we were arguing over, a broker-dealer and did they move money properly or improperly to the harm of the plaintiff, these people never worked at a broker-dealer and aren't licensed with their Series 7, so they don't necessarily know the FINRA regulations that were potentially violated in the process here. But, they were smart professional people. There was an accountant, a full-on CPA. There was two lawyers. So they knew the law and the process, but they didn't have to apply it the same way, obviously, that a courtroom would have applied the process. So they're quasi judges, you could say, but I think it's a much more casual back and forth. No deposition was required. An expert report wasn't required. I had written one, and I even had some material on top of that, demonstratives to help out. But it wasn't required. And although there was, they had checked my qualifications, we had discussion. There was no Daubert challenge or motions in limine or anything like that. So I think it was kind of a mix between the two. It's definitely more casual than a court case, but no less serious. And the outcome, was millions of dollars for the plaintiff and the defendant. So it's important, clearly, but maybe not as regimented, I would say.
Sure, absolutely. It's really interesting because there's so many permutations of types of arbitrations and court cases, for that matter, that have a fairly broad range of formality. Have you worked in other venues, either other states or perhaps at the federal level, or any criminal cases, anything like that? Have you worked in any different venues that have different rules that felt a little bit different to you as an expert witness?
I haven't appeared yet in those courts. I have two state cases and two federal cases, one in the Southern District of New York, one out in Dallas, Texas. So again, I haven't appeared yet. And the process, I got to say, again, as a fairly new expert, I rely on the attorneys to kind of walk me through some of this process. You're not alone. The expert has to remember that they're independent, and that they have to give the truth, and they're not advocating for either side, but they are being paid by and working for one side, and that relationship that gets built with the law firm, I think, is important. And those lawyers can certainly help you out if you're saying, you've got to write your citations this way and footnotes here, no, don't footnote that, and blah blah. I think that shouldn't trip you up. It shouldn't or slow you down. I think you write the best you can, and you can rely on those attorneys to really help you kind of polish your end product. Obviously, they're not writing it for you, or they shouldn't be, but you can rely on them for that process. And where you're saying kind of what's the difference between a state court in California and a federal court in New York? Okay, I don't know. I haven't experienced those things yet. You tell me, and then I'm sure it'll all work out.
Do you feel that in general, attorneys have been pretty good about prepping you on the things that you don't know that will be important?
That can be, it's funny that you asked that, because that can be hot or cold. My experience so far has been very good, but I can feel like, okay, we're really rushed now at the end. So it's a slow grind, maybe months of work, getting the report that you want, just the way you want it, addressing it using the right terminology, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're kind of quiet, you're waiting for them to come back. And then, okay, we've got 2 weeks, let's get it all done. Let's make sure that we're solid on absolutely everything. And it feels a little bit tight at that point. So, obviously the slower the pace, the better, you can with questions back and forth and things like that. But it can happen another way. So you have to be prepared for that too. And I think working on Wall Street, again, being that expert in compliance where you're always kind of facing off to the business, they're challenging you and you have to challenge them back, and you have to justify all of your actions. And I think that has well prepared me for this part of my career. Yeah.
As somebody who is in a very dynamic trade, how do you stay on top of it? In other words, how are you not only an expert, but how do you remain an expert in your field in such a dynamic field?
Luckily, Wall Street topics are always on the news, right? So you're never going to miss something like that. I try and read, I ignore television as much as possible, and I try and read the Wall Street Journal every day or every other day. I also filter things, I make sure that, my Google News, shoots me something that's only, only the relevant things, make sure the cases that I'm interested in, if there's an update to them, court listener or somebody's going to send me an update so that I stay on top of those particular cases. But the news stories of the day, and I've been involved in some of them, have always appeared in either my inbox, or I'm doing it as part of my general reading, because I enjoy reading the Wall Street Journal. I think it's a great publication. I'll read Reuters and Bloomberg as well, but I definitely try and stay away from MSNBC and Fox and all the other talking heads on TV, because I think that's really, you don't get a lot of bang for your buck time-wise, and before you know it, an hour out of your day is gone and you really haven't learned anything. So I suggest people read, but I'm old, so who knows? Or listen to good podcasts, maybe. There are a couple of good podcasts out there.
An excellent podcast like Engaging Experts. Let's move to the general for a moment. How do expert witnesses get off on the right foot on a new engagement? What are the general properties? What makes up a good engagement in general?
Being prepared, right? So as an expert, if before you even have that first meeting with somebody, have you read the complaint letter? Have you read the response to the complaint? If it was has this been in the news, maybe you want to read some news analysis if it's a hot topic. If you know the parties, I'm dealing with sometimes former employers, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, not Lehman Brothers anymore. That's pretty much a done deal. But some of the other, people that I know are now employees. So at Lehman Brothers, for example, now is a diaspora. So there are people at every bank and every shop on Wall Street that I can talk to and say, are you familiar with this situation? Maybe it's not that particular case. I hope it's, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But you can prepare well by utilizing, if you're really an expert, people who know things as well as you do, and you can get diverse opinions on topics. And I think that's important, so that when you get to your discussion with your law firm, the law firm knows that you know this case in particular. Again, you should have read the complaint and the response, but you also have a perspective that you're bringing to it that they don't have and nobody else in the case has. So that's why you're being engaged, to bring that special perspective and expertise. So you should be prepared. Doing that preparation, I think, is really important, and understanding it from multiple perspectives, multiple angles.
As somebody who's been in this business for quite a long time, are you ever concerned that you've said something at one point and you have new information, or you've simply changed your mind and you get impeached on the stand on something that you've said in the past that you don't necessarily still agree with, or was perhaps taken out of context? How do you deal with those sorts of situations?
I would hope that, nothing I ever do is contradictory. My father used to tell me when I was a little kid, he said, say what you mean and mean what you say. So, as long as you act with integrity at every step, that's fine. And if a lawyer is pushing you to say something that you're really not confident in, then don't say it. They want to end the assignment, fine, they end the assignment. If it's a deal breaker, it's a deal breaker. But, you've always got your integrity to carry with you. And if you violate that, then you're not going to last long.
Have you found yourself on larger trial teams? In other words, with other expert witnesses, perhaps paralegals, assistants? Have you interacted with a full team, either in an arbitration or in a trial? And if so, what are those interactions like? To what extent do you collaborate with the various parties of a trial team?
Yeah, it's interesting, because there were a couple of times when I would walk into a room and say, okay, here's the team. And it was 5 attorneys, only 2 of them I had actually worked with up until that point. And I didn't know who was senior to who, right? Are you a partner, or are you a senior associate? Are you the named partner of this firm, or are you? But yeah, working with 4 or 5 attorneys is not uncommon. I think it's just something that you're going to get used to. The dynamics can be interesting, and if you say what you mean and mean what you say, like I said a minute ago, then you never have to kind of back up and say, oh, did I tell them X, or did I tell them Y? Well, you told them the truth 6 months ago. So as long as you still believe that that's the truth, then you'll be consistent. So I think that's, again, if you keep your integrity and you stick with the truth, you don't have to worry too much about what did I say to this person versus what did I say to this person, because you're telling the same story, and your consistency remains. So you might not have told them something because you just didn't have that discussion yet, but when you tell it to them, it's going to be consistent with what you've said to everybody else. So I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, do you have any final advice for expert witnesses, and in particular newer expert witnesses, or even attorneys who are working with them?
So it's funny. So as I said, my father used to teach me, you say what you mean and mean what you say. But my mother used to teach me, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. So not that you can't be critical, and in many cases we have to be critical, but, always be professional. It's none of this is personal. So I wouldn't get too emotional over any of this stuff, and just, for me, I'm looking forward to more years of this as my career right into retirement. So if I could do this for another 10 or 20 years, I'd be really happy. And I think the way to do that, is to keep your integrity, start off on the right foot, don't compromise your ethics, and yeah, good luck to everybody.
Outstanding. Mr. Evans, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Well, thanks, Noah. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
And thank you, as always, to our listeners for joining us for another edition of Engaging Experts. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Engaging Experts. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com.